Dr. Molefi Oliphant is one of those South Africans who've played a significant role in the history of football in the country. The former SAFA President was in charge when some of the most significant events took place, including winning the rights to host the 2010 FIFA World Cup. He spoke to Newzroom Afrika's Benjamin Leshoro this week and reflected on the past, the present, and took a look at the future in terms of what it holds for football in South Africa. With that, we say thank you very much for making us a news channel of choice. Hugo Ribatika will then join you at the top of 12 p.m. Have yourselves a magic day further.
Hello everyone and welcome to this special broadcast on Newzroom Afrika. And it's special because we are today sitting down talking to a man who needs no introduction actually, who has been part of South African football for the longest time. Well, certainly when we were growing up in the townships, we knew this gentleman as the one at the peak or at the top of South African football. And today, Molefi Oliphant is joining me this day to talk about the past, the present, and possibly the future of South African football. Thank you so much, Ndate Oliphant, for talking to us on Newzroom Afrika today, and welcome.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for having me.
All right, I'm gonna start from the beginning, because this interview actually is very special to me in particular, because you and I have a particular connection from where we come from. Many may know that I'm a Free State boy. I am from Kronstadt in the Free State. It just so happens that Ndate Oliphant also has a connection there. Tell us about your roots and where you come from.
I come from Kronstadt, Malking to be specific. I was born there many years ago, the old location. I attended crash there, lower primary school, higher primary school, and also the high school, Budibeng High School to be specific. That's where I was born, that's where I grew up, that's where I started playing football. And to me, Kronstadt is my roots.
How was it? How was it growing up there?
Like any other township, or like any other town or black township in South Africa.
During those times, yeah.
During those times, we grew up in a very good environment where we are nurtured, where we are taught, amongst other things, humility and respect, and grew up in that environment where we're given an opportunity to excel in whatever space you wanted to excel.
You managed to overcome the difficulties of the day, the difficulties of the time that you lived in as a young black man in a township in South Africa in those days. You played football. I hear you were a goalkeeper.
Yes, I was. Without hooting my horn. During those days, I think I managed to be one of the best. Yeah. During those times in our township. Marabastad, played there for Good Hope Football Club. And I grew up in that environment where I was encouraged to do the best. Yeah. Yes, I was a goalkeeper. Let alone the body which you see today. I was young, slender, in a position to do what Rowan Williams did over the first few days.
Yeah, then you were very good. If you could do what Ronwen Williams did for the country. And we'll talk about Bafana Bafana a little bit later. But then you took your football, you didn't go play it professionally, but you still had the desire. You still kept in there, how do you now decide I'm gonna go into administration at some point?
To be specific, in 1968, I joined my mother in Bupilo. She was a nursing sister. And I continued playing football. And after playing football, I became the secretary of the local football association, that is the Bupilombi Patong Football Association. That is where I started with the administration of football. The local football association, during the meetings of the then Transvaal Football Association, as a delegate. And in 1985, when there was a split in football, remember we had the South African National Football Association. Now, one would say I came up through the ranks. I came through the ranks from the secretary of the Bupilombi Patong Football Association to the treasurer of the Transvaal then Soccer Association and the Soccer Association of South Africa. Became the treasurer. That is, in a nutshell, how I rose through the ranks of football in the country.
And now, at the dawn of democracy as well in South Africa, there was also now the South African Football Association. And I think I stand to be corrected, but Ndate Sticks Morewa was president of the association from the early to mid 90s.
Okay, let me put things into perspective. When the Soccer Association of South Africa was established, our president was the late Mr. Sol Musibi from Bloemfontein. He was a school inspector. And the late Solomon Sticks Morewa was the secretary. And I was the treasurer. That is 1985 to 1989. Now, there were these four governing bodies of football in the country. And then immediately, during that time, that in 1989, then Soccer Association of South Africa, of which the late Solomon Sticks Morewa was the secretary, initiated what we called the unity talks in football. And between 1989 to 1991, there was that process of unifying football in the country. And towards the end of 1991, these four bodies, but let me say three because SANFA walked out of the unity talks, came together and established what we today call the South African Football Association. And when it was established in 1991, the late Mr. George Mudulaki George became the interim president of SAFA for 1 year. And then in 1992, then Professor Leshoro was elected as the first president of the South African Football Association. That is the chronology of events.
So that day Solomon Sticks Morewa then took over, and then you took over when?
I took over in January 1997. That was after the Picard Commission, which unfortunately led to the resignation of the late Solomon Sticks Morewa. And in January of that year, the Executive Committee of SAFA appointed me as an interim president of the Football Association. And the same year, the elections were held in September of this same year to democratically elect me into the position of the president of South African Football Association.
And It's very interesting to me then that you oversaw then South Africa's first World Cup appearance. That was in France in 1998. I was very young at the time, but I was already interested in football, thankfully, and I knew who was who. I'm not trying to brag, but I could name the starting lineup in those days already for the coaching team that became headed by Philippe Trouzier. This was following the resignation of the late Clive Barker. Can you give us the events that led to Clive Barker's leaving of his post as the national team coach?
After winning the Africa Cup of Nations in 1996, there was what they call the Intercontinental Tournament organized by FIFA, taking all the continental winners to participate in that tournament in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh to be specific.
So sort of like the Confederations Cup?
Precisely, yes. Unfortunately, the team did not perform well. And at that time, the late Clive Barker was the coach. And after the team did not perform well, he had to resign as the coach.
Was he pushed to do the honorable thing?
Let me take your last word, the honorable thing. Now, a person is not pushed to do an honorable thing. It becomes voluntary because of the performance of the person. And I want to stick on your last word, to do the honorable thing, that phrase, to resign.
But did he not jump because he knew the push was coming?
Well, I was not in his mind to make that determination. But suffice to say that because of the performance of the team, he had no option but to resign.
So you didn't try and convince him otherwise?
To remain. The results, in my view, forced him to take the decision he took.
Hold it right there, Dr. Molefi, because we're going to continue shortly after the break. We're just going to drink some water, and I hope you will do that too, because we're with a well of knowledge of South African football. Stay with us. Thank you so much for staying with us here on Newzroom Afrika, and we are still with a very, very special guest here, Molefi Oliphant, the erstwhile president of the South African Football Association, and he's giving us the history, giving us the lessons when it comes to where South African football comes from, and are we headed in the right direction? We'll find out. Do you have any regrets about hiring Philippe Trouzier? Some of the team members have explicitly said they did not enjoy working with him.
When a coach, in my view, is appointed, all the necessary requirements have been dealt with. And at that point, the point of appointment, one could not deduce or predict what was going to happen after the appointment. But at the point of appointment, he was a suitable coach for the national team.
But after the fact?
No one can predict what happens before the fact.
In retrospect, do you think it was a mistake?
It wasn't. It wasn't a mistake. Because why should you go and do something and thereafter you say it is a mistake? That's my view. I know it is a point that can be debated. But as I say to you now, and to the viewers, that at the point of appointment, he was a suitable candidate for the position. What happens thereafter, unfortunately, no one has control over it. But the mere fact that he could not continue after the World Cup in 1998 tells the story.
All right, let's move on to this now. Another thing happened in 1998, and that was the rise of one Sepp Blatter to power in terms of world football and being the head of the world governing body FIFA. How much of a role did you play in his rise to power?
As a rising and dominant football association on the continent, we did play a role, and we convinced our counterparts in COSAFA to vote for Mr. Sepp Blatter to become the president of FIFA. And I remember fully well that we even invited our colleagues in COSAFA to come to Johannesburg so that we could talk to them, and invited Mr. Blatter to come and address them.
Was this at the request of Mr. Blatter?
Yes and no. No, in the sense that we found from our side that it was necessary that he should become the president of FIFA, because he knew all the dynamics of FIFA. Remember, he was the Secretary General of FIFA, and at that point,
at the Joao Havelange time,
and at that point, from our side, we saw him to be the suitable candidate. That is the no part of it. The yes part of it, obviously, he did come to us and ask for assistance.
To lobby. Was it part of the deal that, look, you vote for me, I'll give you the World Cup?
I wouldn't say it was part of the deal. Let me talk about the World Cup. In 1994, at the Ritz Hotel, when we attended the World Cup, and in that group it was the late Solomon Stitch-Murewa, the late John Lane, Dr. Kazam Dawu, Brian Maun, and myself. And we said, we can host the World Cup. And I remember the late Stitch-Murewa saying,
this was in 94, really?
94. And Stitch-Murewa said to me, Ollie, listen, and these Americans are not a football playing country, but they're hosting the World Cup. And we can do it because we are a football playing country. And when we came back home, he wrote a letter of intention to FIFA that we are in a position to host the World Cup. Therefore, the seed was in 1994.
So, there's a name that I seem to remember very well, probably in 2000, the name of Charles Dempsey. What does it mean to you?
It broke our hearts.
Yeah.
Because we lost the World Cup for 2006. The reason was that he abstained from voting for us, despite the fact that Oceanic, where he was the president, promised to vote for us. For us, it was really a very, very sad moment. But on hindsight, maybe it was good, because we were given enough time to prepare ourselves for 2010. Maybe it was a blessing in disguise. As much as we are heartbroken.
You know, And talking about that heartbreak, I just wonder where you found the strength to go again, because I remember the whole country was devastated. I remember you couldn't walk anywhere without seeing a car that had some profanities directed at the world governing body because of what had happened. People, tears all over the place when the announcement was made, and when President Barker took out the envelope and said Deutschland instead of South Africa. How did you come back home and regroup and say we're going back?
Immediately after what happened, what later on Sir Blatter called the Three Musketeers, we reconvened and said, okay, let us review what has happened, and if there's any other possibility of taking this process forward. And in our discussion, we said, okay, let us take this matter further to court. And I must indicate here now that attempts were made to talk to us that, look, we don't have to take this matter to court.
So going to court, sorry, the Oliphant, going to court was to say, look, we've been hard done by. This was supposed. So you wanted to argue that the 2006 World Cup should, in fact, maybe the voting must take place again. Is that what?
Not necessarily that. We felt that there was something untoward.
Oh yes.
And we wanted that to be investigated.
2004, when the announcement was made, the stark contrast to what had happened 4 years earlier, this time around, tears of joy, hugging, high-fiving, everything. Do you wish, though, with all the work that you did, the groundwork, do you wish that you had stayed long enough to see it to pass, the 2010 World Cup?
This is my personal conviction. As a football administrator at that time, having been part of the team that worked so hard to bring the World Cup to South Africa, personally I thought I've reached the peak of my contribution. That was the zenith. And after that, there was nothing more to achieve. And it was my conviction, and still my conviction today, that I had to stop there and not go beyond winning the World Cup for South Africa.
The running of the association, the running by extension of South African football, is it where you had hoped that it's what now? 20 years since the World Cup was won by South Africa, the hosting rights. It's 20 years now since then. Are we where you had envisaged South African football would be?
I don't think that is a fair question to me. And I wouldn't like to come up with a value judgment and begin to compare the term of office of Molefi Oliphant and any other person's term of office thereafter. No other two individuals are the same. And management style will be different. And therefore, it will be unfair on my part to begin to make that judgment.
Let me then qualify my question. The bigger vision when things like the World Cup are discussed, it's not only that we can celebrate and be merry and hug each other and go to games. It is so that there is a lasting impact on South African football and the kids that are coming after, those who didn't even see the World Cup, can reap the benefits and the fruits of the labor of their grandfathers like Molefi Oliphant. Are you satisfied that those children are getting those rewards?
It's like when you are in a relay, you're running 4x4 or 4x100, and you're carrying the baton, and you have done your best, and you hand over to the next athlete. What happens after that you have no control over, and you can't begin to say, hey, but that guy has let us down. I don't think there can be any person who will say, I'm going to be part of that body to bring it down. I don't think there's anybody who can do that. Where I'm seated, we need to give a continuous support to the current leadership in any organization to do its best and make a contribution to that effect.
That's fair enough, and we will respect that, and Molefi Oliphant. But I want to thank you today for your time, for gracing us and being so open with us with South African football and where it is and where it came from, and giving the lessons that you have. It is truly an honor to have sat down with you today and gotten those lessons. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me once more.